Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Unsecurity Podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Minks, joined today by the always wonderful Brad Nye, and we have a special guest, Pinky Thompson is here from the IR team. Brad, how you doing today?
Doing good. Getting ready. Got to talk about weather, right? Now, actually, we had with Pinky and I were talking earlier. There's been some severe weather going on around the country. It's like most of it actually missed us, but we're going to get real cold here soon. But,
Yeah, it's coming. That's for sure. Winter is coming. Be
yeah,
prepared.
yeah. I can't complain. I made it to January without having to shovel the driveway in Minneapolis.
Yeah,
I mean, that's about as big a win as you're going to get.
I'd say so. I'd say that's a win for sure. Pinky, welcome. How are you doing today?
Good, man. I've made it to January and just now having to put the shorts away, so I'm all right. Yeah,
yeah. Let's not brag too much. We're going to get it next week, man.
Oh, so, I know. It's going to be bad. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. That's why Brad and I were talking about it this morning. But yeah, pretty rough. But yeah, doing good, man. It's
good.
Get back to the holidays. Had a nice break. Ready to go.
Heck yeah. Yeah, it's our first recording, I guess, since before the holidays. So happy New Year to all of our listeners.
Yeah.
Hope you guys had wonderful holidays and excellent New Year. And hopefully things are off to a fantastic start for you. Before we dig in, so today we're going to be talking all things IR with Pinky. Pinky is the team lead of our IR team here at FRSecure. And they had a very busy end of the year. And we thought it would be fun to bring him onto the show today and kind of talk through some of the things he's seen and attack methods, what are common points of ingress, tell us about all the fun you had during the 12 weeks of Breachmas, we could call it, instead of 12 days of
Breachmas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Before we roll, though, we've been hearing a lot of news this week about X accounts being hacked. We've seen the SEC's X account was hacked, and the attackers were able to use that platform to spread some false knowledge or false information regarding Bitcoin and regulation of Bitcoin, which therefore made the value of Bitcoin increase extremely. And, me and Pinky were just talking before the show. So, like, if you have your Bitcoin, we know it's false inflation. Do you move on that? Do you sell right away?
I think you have to preface that with this is not financial information, or the SEC comes after you.
I'm not
a financial advice. Yeah, I'm not a financial advisor. Yeah.
There should be a disclaimer. Yeah. Hopefully, there is a disclaimer. These are just our opinions, and this is not financial advice.
We're
then we also
dudes.
seen, Mandiant, another security firm, had their X account compromised as well. I think they used the platform. Attackers to essentially distribute malicious links, right? And so trying to infect Mandiant followers and customers and all that good stuff.
Reputational hit.
Yep, reputational hit for sure. But from what I understand, I know with Mandiant, they're saying it was because of a change to X's multi-factor authentication policy and team transitions. I'm assuming that would mean internal team transitions for Mandiant. I'm curious. We haven't heard the root cause of the SEC compromise yet, but is it the same? But really, the moral of the story here, it goes back to something we always talk about here, is the importance of multi-factor authentication on all of your accounts.
Well, and not just multi-factor, but correctly implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Don't use push notifications, enter something in. Don't use SMS.
Yeah, 100% implement MFA, implement it right. And the strange thing, and like, I feel bad for Mandiant, that really stinks being a security firm and have something like this happen to your X account. So hopefully they can recover from that. At the same time, I'm a little confused, and not directly slamming anyone, but I think, Brad, you've shared a link with us. We were talking about this before, that multi-factor authentication policy changed almost a year ago. So I'm a little surprised that it was in limbo for this long.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I doubt we'll ever hear any more about it other than what they've said. It was a brute force and a MFA misconfiguration, but I mean, I guess, really, it kind of goes to the moral. It's just a matter of when. It's going to happen to everybody at some point. It's just a matter of when and how do you respond to it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, cool. I don't know. Is there any other news stories you wanted to share today, Brad?
Just two. I had the two that I wanted to say. Cisco Unity has a patch for critical, and Ivanti has 2 0 days that are actively being exploited. So if you have Cisco Unity or Ivanti products, it's their Ivanti's FRSecure VPN product, and then PolicySecure, which is a network access control solution. So if you have either of those, there's workarounds and fixes for those, and then patch for Cisco Unity. Get on it.
Do you know if there's a proof of concept if these are being actively exploited?
The Ivanti ones are actively exploited.
Looks like the Cisco one is too. I was just reading that.
Yeah. Remote code execution.
Okay. So probably we're going to recommend you follow the same process we recommend in this case for everything. If you have these affected products, obviously you want to secure them as soon as possible, but also you want to investigate to make sure you haven't been compromised at this point. It's pretty important. Cool. All right, Pink Man. So busy Q4. You guys did a ton of cases. How you feeling, man, after the sprint?
Well, I mean, we got a little bit of a week off-ish, right? So we were able to get most things wrapped up by Christmas, or at least in a manageable state, right? They're not the house isn't still on fire. We can take a little break and abuse our on-call person a little bit during that week. But yeah, I think we're all okay now. But going into Christmas, I think everyone was just dog tired, man. It was a sprint, like you guys mentioned there. Yeah, kind of the 12 weeks of Breachmas, starting with breach giving and probably a little bit before that, actually, which is common. I mean, we know that this is the pattern every year around this time. We often see around Memorial Day, Labor Day, and then the winter holidays, we'll see significant upticks pretty much every year. This is often our sort of quiet period, right? We're wrapping up the ones that sort of folks didn't see. We'll wrap up the ones that came in early, and then the ones that folks didn't see until they got back from their Christmas vacation to a mess. So still getting a few trickling in here and there, but yeah, we're getting back on track. Good.
Yeah. So with all the cases you guys had to end the year, what were the good thing about this, right, is it offers us lots of exposure to what's happening and offers us opportunities for learning, and then we get to share that information with all of our listeners and our clients to hopefully help better prepare them. Is there maybe one thing that stuck out as you've seen this was the most recurring type of attack or point of ingress, or something that really sticks out that, hey, we need to talk about today?
Yeah, and so this one it's kind of interesting, right? So the last few years, this time period has been really heavy on like ransomware, internal compromise, that type of an attack. And though we did have those, right, because we had a mix of everything, the one that really stuck out to me was that we had a huge influx in business email compromise. Those have been really, I mean, relative to what we normally see, quiet over the last year. You're still going to have them; they still happen, but it was, I mean, a massive wave of email compromise, and targeting different things. Right? We saw the old faithful of the EFT transfer. Change the bank account on an invoice and send it back. That kind of thing. Saw plenty of that, and that was another one that had been kind of quiet over the last year. We used to see tons of those. We'd get, it seemed like we would get one a week for a while. But those had died down a bit and they picked back up. But as far as like point of ingress, the biggest thing that we've seen, and this has really been, we all, I think we probably talked about it on here as well as like the Hacklebox and other places probably about a year and a half ago, was the rise of attacks like Evil Proxy. So these are token theft attacks that allow an attacker to bypass multi-factor authentication. And since we're talking about multi-factor today a little bit, it fits right in there. The way those work is essentially, without going too deep into it, the attacker is proxying your connection over to like Office 365, for example, through their site, and through that mechanism, they're able to capture your authentication token after you've entered your password and you're satisfied multi-factor. And so then they have a valid authentication token, and they're able to use that to log back in and do their evil. And unfortunately, from the technical side, there aren't a ton of great mitigations out there for this. One of the ones that helps is things like safe links and those types of systems to kind of filter out to make sure that link isn't bad before you go to it. But those are absolutely not foolproof. And then, of course, the other big one is user education. Hey, make sure you're paying attention to that link in email before you click it, and don't just pay attention to what the page loads, because once it loads, it looks pretty much, the URL may be different, but the page itself is going to be the legitimate Office 365 or Google or whatever login page. And so you log in, you get your email, everything looks fine. You don't even think to report it until something bad starts to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
And these attacks to Pinky, so it's essentially it's a man-in-the-middle attack, right?
It is,
so
yeah.
We're intercepting credentials, MFA tokens, passing those through, and so our attackers in the middle are then able to get a valid authentication session. And so what we've seen in some of these is that a lot of times the user doesn't realize this even happened, because in some scenarios what they're doing is it's essentially, once they steal that authentication session, the user is then redirected to the valid Microsoft login, and it just looks like, hey, my login didn't work, let me try again. And then they authenticate, and it actually does work that time. And so they think maybe there was a blip, maybe they entered their MFA code. Is that still the same mechanism you're seeing here?
No, so it's worse than that, as I understand. Like, I've not clicked on one of these links personally to run through the process, but the way I understand it is you don't even get that blip. You're still logging in. So they're essentially embedding the Office 365 page inside of another page. And so when you log in, you're actually logging in to Microsoft. But when it passes that token back to your client, to your browser, it's capturing at that point right there. So you don't even see that blip. You don't even know that anything happened. We used to rely on that glitch, right? We would just ask users, "Hey, did you log in once and it didn't look correct?" And then you went on, because they used to do that process of redirecting on. But this one is pretty seamless, and it's exceptionally effective. I would say, just rough estimate of business email compromise we've worked over the last 6 months, I would say 5, maybe 10%, if I'm being generous, have been something other than that. It's just been everyone, because everybody did a good job and turned on MFA. So now they think that they're safe, and the attackers had to find another way to get around that.
Yeah. I actually have one of my clients that wrote a custom script that anytime they got one of those impossible or risky logins, it disabled the account and reset all sessions for that account, because it was happening to them, and they were spending so much time investigating. They just went, nope, we're done. It's automated, kills it within 30 seconds.
And I love that, and I think that everybody should do that. It's a great plan. Unfortunately, because we always talk about this, it's the cat and mouse game, right? We do a thing, the attackers see it, they go start doing another thing. This happens in all forms of attacks. We talked in the past about how our team does a lot of master file table MFT analysis, and so attackers learned that we were doing that as defenders, and they started deleting the directory that the tools are in, because that actually kills out the MFT record for that stuff. So, and on that same line, we always knew this was coming, but we've seen a large uptick in attackers using US-based VPNs for these things now. Right. So they'll even often go as far as, like, let me get it pretty close to where this person's office is. That way they don't trip that impossible travel thing. That has been a big challenge.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit too for our listeners, because we're falling into this thing we like to do where we speak lingo and we assume everybody knows.
Sorry.
And so one of the detection methods for this type of attack historically has been, so we always talk about normalizing your logs, right? And understanding where do your users typically log in from, because we are creatures of habit and we have patterns that are observable, and we can normalize that. And so historically, one method for hunting for a compromised user would be to look for anomalies in the origination location of their login, right? And so Microsoft does have alerts that are built into the 365 suite, so that it's called impossible travel. So for example, if Pinky logs in from Tennessee, and then we see a subsequent login from California or even from another country, we could quickly identify that's likely not Pinky unless he's using a VPN and proxying through those locations, right? And so one detection, I think that's what Brad was explaining, is a really good method to say, hey, you should still be monitoring those alerts, because Some attackers may still be using that method, but that was going to be my question, Pinky, is how good are they now getting at doing recon on their targets beforehand and trying to alleviate those detection methods? Because I know I've even observed somewhere it's not only using US-based logins, but looking at where an entity may be based, right? So if they're targeting FRSecure, they're probably going to try to now VPN and route through the Minnesota area, right? Or Wisconsin,
Yep.
somewhere in proximity. So it may look normal. And are you seeing they're getting better to that level of detail, or is it more still general, like, hey, we're just going to route through the U.S. and hopefully they don't notice?
So far, it's mostly through the U.S. We've not seen a ton of the really detailed, like paying attention to the office locations and, maybe looking somebody up on LinkedIn since, so many people are remote now, that kind of thing. But that's coming, right? I mean, that'll be here soon. And as more VPN services sprout up with more nodes in different places, it's going to be easier. I think that may be a little bit of our saving grace right now is that a lot of the nodes are centralized, right? They're running through AWS in Virginia or, nodes in New York and that kind of thing, but there are more services every day, it seems like. And that's going to get to be a bigger problem probably moving into this year, I would say.
One of the questions I had, when you're talking about the business email springing up, and I'm sure you guys have seen all the articles that say, well, phishing is going to get harder to detect because of generative AI. Are those initial attacks improving, or is it still just people clicking links that they shouldn't click?
I mean, it's still technically people clicking links that they shouldn't click, but I think the attackers have really improved, and maybe that's the wave we're seeing is trying to get in before AI takes over. But AI is great. I'm betting we're not going to see the improvement that we hope for. We may in a short term, right? Like we always do. Big push for MFA a couple years ago, so we stopped seeing a lot of. I mean, I know you guys both remember when we were first working attacks, every time we talked to someone, it was, no, we don't have multi-factor enabled. Right. Now it's, yeah, we have multi-factor enabled. How did this happen? And so just that constant evolution is going to continue. But I think attackers have gotten better about that. I mean, you don't see as much like broken English and things anymore where, that used to be a really telltale sign. They've done better with that, and maybe they're using ChatGPT to make those better. I don't know. And then, like I said, the big thing with sort of those proxied man-in-the-middle type attacks, those have gotten so good that it's really hard for attackers to see. So hopefully AI helps there somewhere.
A question, too, about those links that are being passed for the evil proxy attacks. Are you ever seeing any weaponization in the link itself? So is there ever droppers attached or any secondary attack, or are these typically primarily just focused on sealing that authentication session?
Yeah, they seem to be purely focused on that. I don't think we've seen any instance of there being malware in there. I mean, you always want to, be aware of that, and we're always checking for that, right? We want to find out for sure because, again, maybe the next evolution to this, we didn't get you on this, but we're going to drop some malware in the process. So far, it's been purely credential harvesting.
Yeah, and I have to think, like we look at last year, for example, how many Chrome O-days were there, right? And so I think that if we like to predict and think, that's another opportunity that hopefully as we get better at defending the evil proxy attacks, that our attackers may evolve and try to start exploiting some of those known vulnerabilities with typical browsers that people are using.
Yep, absolutely. And something on the evil proxy, and there's another big one that I can't think of, but they're actually a sort of a phishing as a service type situation, right? So they're just, excuse me, using that platform to do attacks, right? It's some group buys their service for a bit, they use it for a bit. So those are usually not as focused on the malware delivery, but we know that groups evolve and change and get better at what they're doing. So.
So what would you recommend to our listeners today as a primary defense method for this type of attack? What should they be doing to try to prevent their users from being compromised?
Yeah, so education's always the biggest one, right? Training, make sure folks are really, hover over that link, make sure it looks legitimate before you click it, that kind of thing. That's always going to be your best line of defense because the technical things often aren't as up to date on things, right? So beyond that, turn on things like Microsoft Safe Links. If you're using another sort of spam filter, most of those now, I know like Trellix and some of the other ones offer that that type of functionality as well. So turn those things on so that they're looking for a link that looks odd, right? I mean, it's going to hackers99hq.io or something like that, right? Hopefully those things are going to catch that. But yeah, watch out for that on the user side. And then on the, side of what you're talking about, things are going to get through, right? This is going to happen to somebody in your environment. So as always, least privilege for users, right? So that they can't do as much damage once they get that. Beyond that too, like Brad mentioned, set up those alerts and things for the impossible travel, the risky sign-ins, the things that just look a little bit fishy. Kick those on and review them, right? So those alerts are no good if you're not paying attention to them. And then also too, I mean, I tend to recommend people on a weekly basis go take a spin through your logs, your authentication logs. I know it's a big lift. I understand that, and it gets easier as you go through them. But just look for things that look weird. Like Oscar said, if he sees me logging in even from Alabama or something, that's going to look off. That's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And so look for those little things and pay attention to that. I had another one that I lost, and if I think of it again, I'll bring it back up.
I've got one. Maybe this is what you're thinking of.
Okay.
The other thing that comes to mind, too, that we typically see in these situations, right, is when you're logging in, Pinky, you're typically using the same browser type when you're authenticating through a browser, or the same application type, your version of the application. And that should be logged, right? You should be able to see that in your 365 or whatever you're using instance and be able to normalize again. I know Pinky uses Chrome. I know the version of Chrome. I know he uses an Android phone and all these things. And so looking for deviations there. And you could build alerts on that too. So each user has their standard profile. These are the applications that they typically use to log in, because attackers aren't good at knowing what Pinky's using or what your end users are using. So normalizing really and looking for deviations and the fingerprint that's presented as well.
Big one. Yeah, we use that a lot. And that is right there in those cloud email-based systems. It's in their logs. It's a little more challenging if you're using just on-prem Exchange or something like that. It's there, but it's a little harder to find. You have to do a little bit of magic on with Excel and that kind of thing, and get some columns that you can filter. One I will point out that we do see often, right? If you see a Python login, like the user agent says Python, just go ahead and reset that user's password. That's almost certainly not a legitimate login.
What? Users aren't using custom code to log in?
Yeah, exactly. Unless it's an automated system and you know it. And even then, you may want to just keep an eye on it. We've seen that recently too. Automated email accounts that the attackers kind of know are for automated emails, but they have a mailbox attached, and they know that hey, the password may not be so good on that. There's probably not multi-factor on that because it needs to be able to log in, and so that's been a fun one too over the last little bit.
Yeah, so I think in summary, from the defender's perspective, it's still like we always say, right? No normal, find evil. So it's looking for deviations in your log after you've done this normalization process. And I think what we're being forced to do right now is expand what that normalization would normally be. Used to be, it was a little easier just to look at that impossible travel or location-based method. Even time-based method is something else that's really important, right? A lot of our attackers aren't operating the same time zone as we are. So looking for logins that are outside of the normal window that your user would likely be logging in, expanding that to look at like the fingerprint of the application or browser and so on. But I do want to back up and ask a question too, and something that's kind of maybe like a two-part question here that you had mentioned before is like, yeah, we should be using safe links or whatever, some sort of man-in-the-middle sandbox for your users, right? So we're sandboxing and trying to verify these URLs. My question to you is, number one, the typical URLs you're seeing being used, are they obvious for a user that this is going to be malicious, or are they using plays like intelligent plays on Microsoft or 365 or the business maybe they're interacting with? It makes it a little trickier for the user to identify. And then the second is, what is that typical burn time? Do we know for like how long can this malicious URL be used before we start to see VirusTotal tag this as a malicious URL?
Yeah, and so the first one I can't answer very well because it's one of those things where we don't often get the original email. It can be you guys know it's very difficult in an investigation always to get that email. sometimes it's just folks don't want to turn it over. It's got financial information in it, things like that. So it's tough to say on the obviousness, if that's a word, of the URLs, right? So my hunch is that they're probably reasonably obvious, just because there's only so many variations of like, portal.office.com or something like that you can really use. And like you mentioned, those are going to get burned pretty quickly. And then kind of on the second part of that, because we've not gotten a hold of a lot of those URLs, the original thing. So, well, I'll finish that and then I'll back up as to why. But because we're not getting a hold of a lot of those initially, it's hard for us to tell if they're getting burned quickly on VirusTotal, that kind of thing. And so it's a little tough to say there. I would say they're probably getting burned pretty quick. And part of my reasoning for that is just that we see the dwell time is very small on these attacks.
Mm-hmm.
They usually get the credentials and they're logging in pretty quickly. I mean, usually within a day or so, and that's not been typical over the years as well. And they start their attack pretty quickly. So we usually have a pretty good idea of when it happened, and the user can kind of figure that out and that sort of thing. But also, too, the attackers often go in and delete those emails once they have access. So it gets a little bit tricky to kind of track all that down.
So it kind of leads into my question. You mentioned the dwell time. Building off of that, how long is the dwell time before the company realizes this? So if attackers are attacking it within a day, let's say 24 hours, how long before the company goes, oh, crap, we got a problem?
It depends on... Often it depends on a third party, unfortunately, because what will happen is, so a lot of these are being used for the EFT fraud, right? And so it may be weeks or a month before somebody says, hey, we never got paid for this, or, hey, did you guys receive our payment, that kind of thing. And so it's not often quick, unfortunately. I was kind of think back to a few that we were talking to, and a lot of them were, 4 to 6 weeks before they realized something was wrong. The other side of that is if they're using that to further phishing attacks, which we, see a lot, right? They compromise an account. There's nothing good there. So we're just going to use that to hit up all their contacts and try to get some more people. Those are a little quicker because they usually do that within a week or two. And what happens is then you get that alert from Microsoft or whoever that says, hey, this account sent out 6,000 emails yesterday. We froze the account. Take a look at it, that kind of thing. Or they get a bounce back from one of their clients that says, hey, you sent me a weird link. What is this? And then they go, oh no, something's wrong. So those are a little faster. The EFT ones are not quite as fast. And, as you guys know, and probably our listeners, a lot of them know, that's unfortunate because if you don't get to those pretty quickly, you're not going to be able to claw that money back, unfortunately. So
yeah, that's crazy.
One thing I did want to tag on before we got too far away from it was things to look for. I think this is where I was going a second ago and lost it, but I'm particularly talking about Microsoft 365 at this point because they kind of have the big target on this. You have that ability to add like Office 365 apps. And so these are all cloud-based apps. It's not something you install, but it's something you can add to kind of like your profile in Office 365. And you can, as an admin, you can turn it on. You can turn on a setting so that those all have to be approved by you. And that's something I'd recommend that everybody go do right now. I'm sorry about your inbox, and I'm sorry it's going to be a problem for you to do that admin work to handle that. But we've seen a lot of attackers are using those to sort of establish an API type presence, right? So that they don't need to log in through the portal or whatever. And those also generally don't require multi-factor because they're meant for programs to talk back to that interface. It's an API. That's what those are for. And so we've been seeing a lot of that, and they're not always obvious. Sometimes you'll find one that says test, and you can kind of know, hey, that's probably not right. But sometimes there'll be like a misspelled Adobe or something like that, something you maybe legitimately use in your apps. So keep an eye on those and set that to, admin approval needed, because that's a big one. Because even if you reset the password, all that kind of thing, do all your cleanup, if you forget that piece, the attackers may still have access.
Yeah, for sure. That's something we've seen missed a lot, right? Where people are resetting sessions, authentication sessions, resetting those credentials and all that. But if they're not auditing those approved apps for that user, things still slip through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in summary here, for our listeners today, we've always talked about how MFA is a step in the right direction, but it's not a silver bullet. And kind of as we've expected, attackers are learning to be able to get around MFA and find other methods to get access into your environment. And really, so we have safe links. That's a good thing. We've talked about ways to hunt. These are all good things. But again, none of these are silver bullets. And even if those domains are going to get burned quickly, it's still going to get through your link checking application for a short period of time as well. So users are susceptible. This still goes back to what you said, Pinky. The most important thing, as will always be the most important thing, is education of your user base. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and education and encouragement for doing the right thing, right? When they report those links, right, encourage them to that, and make sure in your training you're encouraging them. Please report this. Like, don't worry about overloading us or whatever. If you to go back to an old 9/11 slogan, right? If you see something, say something, right? So that's so huge, because when you have that month-long time where you don't know what's going on, maybe they saw something else. Maybe something, looked a little bit suspicious to us. Just report that and let your IT folks and security folks check it out.
That goes to the security culture too, right? Like, never punish your users. Never shame. Always education. Always improve. Okay, it's happened. How can we improve it so it doesn't happen again? When they report, reward them, praise them. It really is important.
Mm-hmm. That see something, say something mentality too. I agree with that. And I think another failure we sometimes see is that users may receive this malicious email. They identify it's malicious and they say, you're not going to get me, delete and move on, instead of reporting that, where they weren't a victim, but they didn't report that. So other users in your organization got that same message, and there's a good likelihood that they weren't able to observe that and identify that as malicious. So even if you are security minded, you understand it's still important to report that, so you can go through the proper procedures to purge those messages from your environment, determine who received the message, and determine if they actually interacted with the link that was included. So always report.
Yep. There's easy ways too to help build that. From a business perspective, I've had customers that anybody that reported an actual spam message or phishing message got entered into a drawing, and it was like $25 a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
$400 a year, and who wouldn't pay $400, $500 over the course of a year to prevent a single email compromise? The ROI on that is absurd. Just build it out, get them engaged.
One of my favorite ones, and I think I learned it from somebody on our VCISO team here. Or was it Charles? Yeah, it was Charles. Is the chocolate bar method, right? I mean, How much does a miniature Hershey's bar cost? Keep a bag of those on your desk. If you're a security person, when somebody reports that thing, just go give them a chocolate, give them a treat. It's a weird, we don't think it was it's just a chocolate bar, but no, I mean, it's encouraging. And hey, I like chocolate, so.
Yeah, I had a VCISO that got company branded chocolate bars.
Oh, awesome.
And it was less than $1 each. And they would just hand them out when somebody reported something and kind of went above and beyond.
Well, cool. This has been fun. Appreciate you coming on, Pinky. I know there's more, and we're barely touching the tip of the iceberg today. So we'll try to get you back on again sometime soon and keep talking through these stories. I think it's hopefully really good for our listeners. But appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Let's do some shout outs too before we end, and I'm going first. I'm going to give a shout out to all of our listeners. I appreciate everybody who tunes into this every week, and you guys, we've got a new year and we're more organized. I think we've got a better cadence. We're going to try to get these podcasts out to you 2 times a month right now is our goal, and keep rolling through that. And thanks for sticking it out with us. We appreciate you've been here and been with us. So
it turns out having a full-time job and trying to do a podcast is a little bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah.
Weird.
All right, Brad, who you got?
I like that. I'll second that. I mean, the other reason we're kind of doing this is so hopefully there's value there. But I would say I was going to give a shout out to all the behind the scenes people at FRSecure, our finance and HR, and we had Amy on in December. But our finance team and working through the all the stuff, Salesforce we use, So the team working on that, just making our lives easier and, continually rolling out improvements and maturing things behind the scenes that just don't get seen a lot.
I second that. Appreciate that call out too. It's like while we all got to take a little holiday break, like the people behind the scenes were still working their tails off to make sure we get our year closed down. Our PM team was still working to make sure we could get through, tool migrations and all these really things to kick our year off right. So thank you guys so much for that. All right, Pinky, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to do two. So, because I'm always going to shout out my team, particularly this time of year, because those guys they're tired right now. They put in a lot of good work, did a lot of good work for clients, and helped a lot of folks out, and were gracious in the process, right? Which is always important. These people, we always talk about that. We're talking to people on likely the worst day of their career, and so it takes some patience and understanding, and making sure you're keeping them where they need to be. The second one is a little bit off the norm here. I'd like to shout out all the IT and security admins that are out there behind the scenes trying to put me out of a job. Continue, do the right thing, keeping up on patches, keeping everything under control, and like I said, just doing the right thing out there. I don't think they get a lot of love, and all three of us have been that guy in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so a little bit of love for them. I know the holidays are always a tough time in that part of the world.
For sure. Yeah, good shout out. I love that. I'll second that. I second all these.
Same.
So it's a great episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again, Pinky, for taking the time to join us today. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for having me, everybody.